What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, January 11th, 2019. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. And we have got a lot to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. That's 800-313-9443. Sam is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Couple of quick program notes. Of course, this being Friday, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 with her unique perspective on the world. Monday, we're going to have a guest in our third hour, Frosty Wooldridge, who's going to be talking about the costs of illegal immigration, not just in monetary terms, but in terms of cultural erosion, the health risks, and so forth. So that's going to be a heck of a program. So tune in on Monday for that one here. Okay, speaking of immigration, as you know, the fight over the border wall is continuing, and Pelosi and Schumer are out there digging in their heels, and they're saying, not $1, not $1. You know, we'll be gosh darned if we're going to let Trump accomplish his signature victory. You know, we want him to go into 2020 as a complete and total failure, and we don't care how much we have to damage the nation to do it. Now, the Border Patrol chief, who is an Obama appointee, he served as Border Patrol chief under Obama, is out there saying to Trump, stay the course on the border wall. And Mark Morgan served for 6 months under Obama before being asked to step down by Trump when he took office. And he's mostly kept his opinions to himself, but on Tuesday, Morgan vocalized his support for the president's plans. He told Law and Crime the wall works, and Trump is correct on what he is doing. And he got interviewed by the Washington Post, where he reiterated Trump is doing the right thing. Over in Great Britain, Nigel Farage is saying that President Trump is trying to prevent the United States from becoming what Europe has become. And if you've been following what's going on over in Europe with all of the migrant problems there, the rapes, the robberies, the acts of terror, and the crime, you understand this is a good thing. In fact, Farage went on to say that Europe should have built a wall years ago. So Farage said, the primary duty of any government is to look after the integrity of the nation and to protect its own citizens. And he's absolutely right. We, as the United States of America, we don't have any obligation to the rest of the world to take in they're poor, they're diseased, they're criminals. We're under no obligation whatsoever. So anyway, Trump is now looking around for ways to fund the border wall and get it going without the Democrats. And apparently the Pentagon has said that if Trump declares a state of emergency, they have $3 billion on hand that they can throw into the pot, along with the Army Corps of Engineers. And apparently President Trump is looking at some unspent money from the Puerto Rico Disaster Fund to make up the shortfall. Apparently there's something like $13 billion. So all Trump has to do is declare a state of emergency. Interestingly enough, Schumer and Pelosi are starting to lose the support of their own party. More and more Democrats are starting to say, yeah, we do need the border wall. And remember, back in 2006 and 2013, the Democrats were all saying, yes, we've got to secure our border, including a lot of the people who are attacking Trump, saying the wall is immoral. You know, it's a terrible thing. You know, we've got to just let all these people. Everybody in the world has a right to come to the United States of America, including MS-13 and drug dealers and rapists and, you know, people with bubonic plague. So apparently over on CNN, the chairwoman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, Representative Sherry Bustos, said, if we have a partial wall, if we have fencing, if we have technology used to keep our borders safe, all of that is fine. Democratic Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon came on out and said some fencing is useful. Some barriers are useful. There's been a lot of surveillance technology. I've been to some cities on the border that have triple fencing and have more personnel and have the technology to see the people moving in the middle of the night. Democratic Representatives Eric Swalwell of California and Jerry Nadler of New York said they would support necessary funding and barriers. Democratic Senate Minority Whip Dick Durbin of Illinois says he thinks there will be a new barrier in the future along the U.S.-Mexico border. Vice Chair of the Democratic Conference, Representative Catherine Clark of Massachusetts, says that new barriers at the border would be beneficial. She said, I think there are parts of the border that would benefit from repairing fencing and other barricades that already exist there. So Pelosi and Schumer are close to standing alone on this. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And you need to realize, again, $5.7 billion to the U.S. government is pocket change. It's less than 0.1% of total federal government spending. And Schumer and Pelosi are digging and saying, not $1, we can't do it, it's immoral. But then if you look at some of the other things the Democrats have spent money on, that were boondoggles, complete waste of money, but they went ahead and voted for it. The Rural Utility Service, that costs $8.2 billion every single year. And it has no actual purpose because its original intent, which is to bring electricity to rural communities, was achieved long ago. Everywhere has electricity. Now they're trying to repurpose to bring broadband access to small communities, but there's no indication that these towns actually appreciate the program. And the majority of its projects, like anything with the government, are not completed on time or within budget. Then there are the sugar subsidies. And it's kind of ironic. The Democrats are always talking about, diet and the health crisis and how bad sugar is, but Congress subsidizes the production of sugar and high fructose corn syrup. Eliminating the sugar subsidies alone would save $6 billion, enough to fund Trump's wall. And it would also have the added benefit of helping curb the nation's obesity epidemic, along with getting rid of food additives that make you want to eat more. Community development grants. These grants were created in the 1970s to revitalize failing American cities. The program has been plagued with dysfunction. The grants went to wealthy communities who really didn't need it. And if you got rid of that, that would save $15 billion over 5 years. Then there's the United Nations. In 2016, the U.S. donated $10 billion to the United Nations. Then you have Amtrak. Huge government subsidy there. Amtrak should be sold to the private sector. The railroad should go back to being privately run. They would almost certainly be operated more efficiently. And over the next 5 years, Amtrak subsidies will cost $9.7 billion. Then there's all that unused real estate. Congress appropriates money to maintain federal real estate that is not being used. On October 31st, CRS report found that in fiscal year 2016, federal agencies owned 3,120 buildings that were vacant, and another 7,800 that were partially empty. Now, if selling this unused property were prioritized, the 5-year savings on maintenance are estimated at $15 billion. Simply maintaining these unused vacant buildings annually costs $1.7 billion. There's a lot of waste out there. Then there's foreign aid. Friends, Egypt, South Sudan, Uganda, South Africa, Russia, the Congo, Sudan, and Zambia. And of course, all that money going into Israel. $30 billion over the next 10 years. What does Israel do with all that money? Boy, do they build walls. Boy, do they build walls all over the place. And then what about the waste, fraud, and abuse. The Government Accountability Office estimates that there is $137 billion lost annually, every year, on what are politely called payment errors. So the money's there. They've got the money. And that's not even talking about, the missing $21 trillion between the Pentagon and housing and urban development. Now, do you remember back on September 10th, 2001, Donald Rumsfeld got up at the Pentagon and announced that $2.3 trillion was missing, unaccounted for, $2.3 trillion. Should have been the economic scandal of the year, but of course the next day was 9/11, and Donald Trump, lucky Donald Trump, didn't have to deal with the aftermath, didn't have to deal with the media firestorm and the public outrage over $2.3 trillion with a T missing from the Pentagon. But just think about it. $2.3 trillion would pay for the entire border wall reaching from the Pacific to the start of the Rio Grande, and there'd be enough left over to repair all of our nation's infrastructure. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Jim in Chicago, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. What you just stated, I agree with. There's a lot of waste and fraud and everything else. But the last 2 years, and this is why I can't blame the Democrats so much, the last 2 years, the Republicans control the House and the Senate. So if they wanted to put a wall in the budget, they could have done so.
One has to wonder why that was not, in fact, being done, and why, Trump wasn't pushing as hard then as he is now.
I think, one article that I read, he's upset because the Democrats now control the House, which means they control the money. Look at the money that he was able to come up with when it came to the farmers. $12 billion for the farmers, and that came out of nowhere.
And again, there's a huge amount of money floating around the government. $5.6 billion is nothing. This is no longer about immigration. This is Trump versus Schumer and Pelosi. And if, in fact, the Democratic leadership are abandoning their position, then Trump, at least politically, is going to win this one.
Well, yeah, in that sense, I would agree with you. But the fact is, like you just stated, why did he wait until the last minute? He had 2 years to do this. He could have done it in the beginning of 2017.
He absolutely could have done it in the beginning of 2017. He could have done it last year. And you raise an important point. Why wasn't it done? Why hasn't the election system been cleaned up? Why did he drop the ball on vaccine safety? Why are so many of these deep state criminals still walking around free when during the campaign he was talking about throwing these people in jail? This is one of the reasons why I keep saying, Trump is a bit of a disappointment. And maybe that's the reason why now he's pushing on that border, because that was his main campaign promise, and he knows he's got to accomplish something going into 2020 or he's a one-term president. And that's also why the Democrats are pushing back, even though these very same Democrats voted in favor of border security back in 2006 and 2013.
And I would agree with you. And the final note, I was listening to C-SPAN this morning, and they were talking about the government workers who are not getting a paycheck starting today.
Yes.
And they have some problems as far as hurting, not being able to pay their bills, not paying their kids' tuition. So this is a long-term effect. And I don't think the Democrats really realize that it's going to hurt not only them, but also Republicans, because when you start hurting people financially, they don't care if you're Democrat or Republican. They're upset.
Well, they're going to be upset, and of course, what we're seeing in the corporate media is an attempt to say this is all Trump's fault, but it isn't. It's Schumer and Pelosi, and we all need to keep.
I blame them also. I blame both sides. That's where I'm coming from. Both sides. So,
well,
Michael,
in this case, Trump went ahead and tried to get to move forward on the immigration. And for all we know, the reason that he accomplished so little in the first 2 years is obstructionism from the Democrats. Just the fact that they were not in control of Congress doesn't mean that they were not out there trying to block him. And don't forget, for the last 2 years, Donald Trump has been absorbed with all these endless investigations and media attacks and everything else that's been going on. The Democrats are absolutely adamant they're not going to let Trump accomplish anything positive between now and 2020.
Oh, I would agree, but you know what, though, Michael? We haven't seen anything yet. Now that there's going to be a lot of different hearings, this is only the beginning of the iceberg. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
Take care and God bless, Michael.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Okay, couple of facts you need to keep in mind when everyone's talking about, the cost of the wall is going to be horrible. 73% of immigrant households are on welfare. Why don't you tally that up and see what that's costing every year? The fact of the matter is that paying the hospital bills for all the illegal immigrant births is more than the wall. And there is an issue of safety. Have you noticed the double standard coming from the Democrats? Okay? The data is showing that illegal aliens kill more Americans each year than AR-15s. We got to ban the AR-15s, but illegal aliens, welcome, come on in, go ahead, rape and kill, and here's some free stuff. And it basically betrays this very clear double standard by the Democrats. They want the illegal immigrants in order to stay in power by having the illegal immigrants vote, even though they're not supposed to, and they want the guns so that they can turn you from being an American citizen into being an American serf. Okay, we're going to take another phone call from Jeff in Minnesota. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, there's been a big breakthrough last night. 88 days ago, there was a 13-year-old girl in Wisconsin
who
lived in the country, and a man or several people broke in, murdered her parents, and took the girl. And yesterday afternoon, she was able to get free of her captive and found a lady walking her dog. We went to a neighbor's house, and the girl was able to describe the suspect's car, and the police were able to get it.
Yeah, so they picked him up. The girl's name is Jamie Kloss, and the suspect, I have his name here somewhere.
He's 21.
Yeah, Jake Patterson, 21 of Gordon. And what's really kind of weird is that this Patterson doesn't seem to have a prior criminal record. So where this all happened, where this all came from, I don't know. I want to know if this guy was on prescription antidepressants again.
Well, there's going to be a news conference in 40 minutes, so yeah, that's a real neat story because you think, something like that, normally they never see him again, so be thankful.
Okay, we're having a little bit of problem with your phone connection. It gets very, very muted and muffled. Right.
So, I'll see you next time. Thanks.
All right, we're going to let you go here and switch over to Alex in Canada. Aloha, Alex. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, I was doing some math on schools. Trump said there was 20,000 minors that came across the border in the last month. I did a little bit of research. There's 614 kids in each school on average across the states.
Yes.
So we have to build 32 schools a month. So we have to build a school every day, a brand new school to accommodate. Now, there might be some overflow now we could fill up first, but inside of a month or two, we got to start thinking about this. An average school costs $26 million, so that's $832 million a month we're going to have to spend on schools. So in 7 months, that's $5.8 billion in just 7 months. And that's not counting staffing the schools completely.
Yeah, or the equipment, the books, the lab equipment, yeah, and so forth and so. Yeah, the numbers just don't add up. It's cheaper in the long run to build that wall. Alex, got to let you go. Got to take a commercial break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, the corporate media, of course, is still out there towing the line that open borders are good, that illegal immigrants are wonderful. We should just welcome them all in here, because, we need to keep our population up. As it turns out, birth rates have fallen in this country drastically. And right now, for the legal American population, birth rates are so low, we're not even replacing our own population. There are more deaths than births now, whether that's the epicite gene or what, we don't know. But anyway, the corporate media is out there pushing this whole idea that, this is all wonderful and we should go for it. Now, CNN yesterday called KUSI TV in San Diego, asking if one of their reporters would give them a local view of the debate on the border wall. And so KUSI sent Dan Plant, who's reported dozens of times on the borders, to basically go on and talk to people, all of whom said the border wall works. When they put the border wall up, a lot of the problems went away. CNN decided not to air that report. What they were hoping for was that people are going to say, oh, we don't want the wall, we love our illegal immigrants, and all the rest of that nonsense here. Okay. Interestingly enough, Wednesday, Fox News anchor Bill Hemmer was talking to the chair of the Democratic National Committee, Tom Perez, and just asked him point blank, what changed? Because back in 2006 and 2013, Democrats were fully on board with border security and a wall. They, in fact, they voted for the Secure Border Act of 2006, which was supposed to build 700 miles of fence, of which only 33 miles actually got built. So I'd like to know where the rest of that money went. And Perez really couldn't come up with anything. Why the Democrats are changing their position, other than it's now Trump who wants a secure border. It's not about policy. It's about personalities. It's about Trump versus Pelosi and Schumer. Now, the corporate media is out there saying that if the government shutdown doesn't end immediately, America will be facing an economic nightmare. They are overstating the situation. Yes, there's pain for a lot of people. It's not the end of the world. It's not the end of the economy. What they're trying to do is make everybody feel sorry for all those federal workers who have been furloughed by the partial government shutdown, in the hope that we'll call up Donald Trump and say, please sign the spending bill so that all these poor people can go back to work at the airport grabbing our crotches. Well, if there's anybody we should be calling to say give in, it's Pelosi and Schumer. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, members of the Democratic Party are now coming out and saying, yeah, there's nothing wrong with a border wall. It would be a really, really good idea. All right, getting into other things, other domestic politics than the border wall and the shutdown here. Attorney Rudy Giuliani is out there saying that when Robert Mueller's final report comes out on the Russian collusion, that he thinks Trump's legal team should be able to review it for possible errors. And he was being interviewed with The Hill, and said that Mueller's investigators should first give the report to Trump's lawyers for the review as a matter of fairness, so we can correct it if they're wrong. They're not God after all. They could be wrong. Actually, they could be lying, and they probably are. Meanwhile, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is struggling to explain how to pay for $40 trillion in government programs. I mean, she's out there proposing Medicare for all and, free stuff for here, free stuff for there. And basically, she was on Anderson Cooper on CBS 60 Minutes being interviewed, and they tallied up all of her proposals. It came to $40 trillion. And he said, where are you going to get that money? Remember during the campaign, somebody asked, how are you going to pay for all this? And she just said, we'll just pay for it. How? We'll just pay for it. Apparently, Alexandria, or Sandy, that's what she called herself when she was young, Sandy, is apparently irritating a lot of her fellow Democrats. And over at the Democratic caucus, the House Democratic caucus, some of its members are mounting an operation to try and rein her in. Because, I mean, she's obviously seeking the spotlight. She's a very vain person. She's going out to the Sundance Film Festival to watch herself in a documentary. Why would she have to do that? She was there. She knows what she said. But apparently, they're trying to get Alexandria to tone it down a little bit. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. So, turning over to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the latest word we're getting is that she will probably not be able to attend the Supreme Court for all next week. And this is already kicking up a behind-the-scenes firestorm. There are rumors of imminent retirement. Obviously, the liberals want her to stay on until 2020, when they hope to capture the Senate in order to block any more conservative Supreme Court justices. But if Ruth Bader Ginsburg can't show up to the Supreme Court, at some point she's going to have to look in a mirror and say, I can't do the job anymore. She's in her mid-80s. I noticed on the corporate media, they're running all these puff pieces about how, she's over this latest bout of cancer, the surgery works, she's cured, she's fine, she's going to go back to work. But eyewitnesses are saying the few times she's been seen out of her home, she's having to be helped in and out of cars. And I really do feel bad for her. Cancer is a terrible, terrible illness. And maybe I'm being hypersensitive because Claire and I lost more than a few people to cancer just this last year. But obviously over at the White House, they're looking at a short list of potential Supreme Court nominees. Basically, they're using the list that was left over from Kavanaugh. And the liberals are just figuring, what can they do to prevent this from happening? And apparently one of the nominees on that list is a woman, which is going to make it harder for the liberals to attack her going into that confirmation hearing. But it will be a fight, and it will be a three-ring circus thanks to the Democrats. But at this point, it's almost like they're going to strap Ruth Bader Ginsburg to that dolly left over from Silence of the Lambs, and they'll just wheel her into the court and set her up and say that's just fine. Blink your eyes one time for guilty and two times for not guilty. As you know, there's a new movie out called Vice, which is supposed to be a humorous and lighthearted telling of the career of Dick Cheney. And some of the critiques that have already come on out about it are saying that it really does gloss over some of the worst of what Dick Cheney did when he was vice president, during his entire career here. Interestingly enough, apparently Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner went to a West Palm Beach theater to see the movie, and they walked out about halfway through with their Secret Service security detail. No explanation why. They may have found it wasn't entertaining, or they may have just been concerned about this film being an attack on Republicans in general, which I'm certain is why Hollywood came out with this movie at this particular time, to bash the Republicans. Is it going to be a remake of the Watergate story? To get Richard Nixon out there again? Anyway, over in Los Angeles County, and we mentioned this before, Judicial Watch has signed a settlement agreement with the Los Angeles County to remove inactive voters from the voter rolls. It turns out there are more registered voters in Los Angeles County than there are American citizens. Imagine my shock. And of course, all of those registrations can be used to commit election fraud. So Judicial Watch continues to do some really excellent work about that. All righty. Now, here's an alarming article. This is out of Patriot Rising. Congressional Democrats are now on the warpath. They want to completely change the election rules nationwide to make sure they can never lose again. This actually goes back to 2016 when they went on the warpath against voter ID laws, which make it possible for people who are in those voting stations to verify that the person casting a ballot is a legal American citizen entitled to vote. And the Democrats, of course, were screaming, racist, it's racist to force them to show an ID. Try using that one when you get pulled over by a traffic cop and they want to see your ID. Oh, you're being a racist. Not going to work. Or you go into a bottle shop to buy a bottle of wine, they want to see your ID. Oh, you're being a racist. You're not going to get your bottle of wine. Only in this voting area do Democrats say that being required to show an ID, a photo ID, is somehow racist. And they did succeed in getting voter ID laws struck down in a lot of states. And in all the states where they got those voter ID laws struck down, Hillary won. And in those states that had voter ID, Trump won for the most part. And now they're talking about getting rid of the Electoral College, but that's going to take a constitutional amendment, and they're never going to get that one past 3/4 of the states. So it's not going to be as easy as they would like. And there's another area where Trump should have acted when he had a Republican Congress, a nationwide voter ID law. And he can't get it now. The House, under the control of the Democrats, they'll never pass that. They will never, ever pass that. Trump missed an opportunity. He may have thought he was going to have a Republican Congress for the second 2 years of his term. I know he was counting on Sheldon Adelson to fund the GOP to a House victory. But Trump just didn't understand how the illegal immigrants were being used to flip districts from Republican to Democrat. He should have been paying attention, and he wasn't. Okay, article out of Consortium News. Are neocons an existential threat? And they're basically talking about how neoconservatives have damaged American national interest more than any other group in modern history. They've done more harm than the communists pursued by Joe McCarthy, more than the yippies of the 60s, more than Nixon, more than Iran-Contra. The neocons have plunged the U.S. government into extraordinarily ill-considered wars, wasting trillions of dollars, killing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, and destabilizing large parts of the planet, including the Middle East, much of Africa, and now Europe. There is a swelling hatred against America and a deformed U.S. policy elite that doesn't really seem capable of formulating coherent strategies anymore. And I've been saying that for a long time. It feels like America's foreign policy, it's just fragmented. It's just all over the place. And this all goes back to the Project for the New American Century, which was this neocon think tank that came on out and said, well, the United States is the world's only remaining superpower. We should act like it and just take over the planet. And it's going to be 100 years of unending war. But in the end, it'll be worth it for those of us who are still alive, of course. Interestingly enough, it looks like Donald Trump has in fact put his foot down regarding Syria. And the U.S. military has confirmed that troops are starting to leave Syria. And the comment is coming on out here that we don't take orders from Bolton. And it looks like basically Trump said, I'm pulling the troops out. Bolton and Pompeo said, no, you're not, until we say so. And apparently Trump came on back and said, I'm saying so, and it's going to happen right now. So that whole situation's in play. Here's the bottom line. Both John Bolton and Mike Pompeo are insubordinate. They refuse to implement the directives of the President of the United States of America, and they basically went on out with their own version of foreign policy regarding Syria. Trump is justified in firing them, and I think he should. And get some people in there who are not war hawks, who are willing to basically say, I'm going to work with the president to try and get this war insanity under control before we have mushroom clouds all over the place. Now, speaking of Syria, apparently 5 British soldiers were killed in a rocket attack by ISIS in the village of Al-Sha'afa in the eastern province of Deir ez-Zor. And if this would be confirmed, it would be the second incident involving British casualties in several days. Well, you guys wanted to go down there. Now, on January 7th, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo also recalled Washington's contribution to the war on ISIS in Syria and Iraq by claiming the U.S. had eliminated 99% of ISIS caliphate. Well, then why are we still there? Well, we've got to get that 1%. Actually, the goal in Syria has changed again. I'll get to that in a minute here. Turkey is getting ready to go after the Syrian Kurdish YPG militia and is advising Trump, get your troops out of the way right now, or they're going to get hurt. And it's tough talk, but Erdogan is proving himself to be a wild card. You know, he's the loose cannon on deck. And nobody's really sure what he's capable of or not capable of doing here. People are still talking about Mike Pompeo's speech at the American University over in Cairo, where he basically made the case for a continued U.S. intervention in the Middle East. And he went on out there with this load of codswallop about how the U.S. isn't there to occupy, we're there to do good, how, you know, we stopped Saddam Hussein and his weapons of mass destruction, and just, he laid it on with a trowel. Mike Pompeo is out there basically saying that the new goal in Syria is to expel every last Iranian boot. And he's out there trying to reassure Middle Eastern nations that it was not withdrawing from the region despite what the president says. Oh, pay no attention to him. He's just the president. He doesn't know anything. He's not in control. We are. Mike Pompeo went on to say that the U.S. will not accept a major Hezbollah presence in Lebanon. And basically came on out, said that the U.S. goal is to expel Hezbollah from Lebanon. Now, there is a small problem. Hezbollah are Lebanese. They are all Lebanese. They're not from Iran. They're not from Syria. They're not from Iraq or anything like that. There's no place to expel them to. And it's probably because of all of this stuff that a lot of people came on out and said that Mike Pompeo's Cairo speech was just historical imperial hogwash. An arrogant tirade extolling the U.S. as a liberator, not an occupier, a defender, not an aggressor, a depiction that runs totally counter to the sordid U.S. history of invasions and occupations all over the world. Translation, nobody was fooled by his bovine excrement here. Over in France, the Yellow Vests continue to protest. They are targeting EU flags. They're tearing them down, setting them on fire. They're making it very clear. One of their new demands is they want out of the EU. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Jennifer in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, you know how you're always saying that, and I've been agreeing with you that, you know, Trump needs to use his presidential brass knuckles. But, you know, I started thinking, like, say that he does things that, you know, need to be done and we all want to be done. But then the next president comes along who's liberal and crazy and, like, you know, goes, you know, 5 steps further. Like, so say he, like, you know, declares a national emergency, has his wall built, what if the next president, declares climate change a national emergency and does, all kinds of stuff we don't want done? Are you worried about that, or do you think they might do that anyway?
Well, they're already doing it. They're already doing it under the rubric of human-caused global warming. They're trying to impose carbon taxes. They're trying to get people to buy and sell carbon credits. They're basically using human-caused global warming as justification to impose stricter and stricter controls on how we live our lives. Where we live, how much gasoline we're allowed to have, what size cars we're allowed to have, and it really is quite tyrannical, and it's all based on a hoax. And frankly, you should see what's happening all across Europe, and is starting to happen here in the Midwest, because if there's human-caused global warming out there, we need some of it right now. These people are getting buried.
So what are we going to do if that happens? Because I still live in Texas still, where you can still collect, rainwater, but that's just kind of a scary thing that's probably going to happen in the future.
Well, government is always going to expand. They're always going to justify that expansion by finding more things to control in your life. The EU is a good example. It supposedly started out simply as a free trade, free travel zone, and over the years, Brussels has just grabbed more and more authority and more power to the point where some of it's pretty ridiculous. Like in supermarket produce shelves, the produce has to all be within certain size limits, and everything else gets thrown away. I mean, it's just utterly ridiculous stuff. And that's one of the reasons why so many of the people in Europe are saying it's time for it to go. Now, getting on back to the issue of the president, whatever a president and a Congress does, unfortunately, can be undone by a following president and Congress. And that is one of the weaknesses of our system, especially when you have a two-party system that is constantly at war with each other. Mind you, when this country was started, there was no two-party system. There were all kinds of different parties, and they were all coming in with different agendas, and they would basically have their conflicts, if you will, out on the campaign trail. Well, now, unfortunately, we have these two vested so-called traditional political parties who are weaponizing the government against each other at the expense and inconvenience of the American people.
Well, that's what I'm getting really afraid of, so I guess you are too. But
I'm concerned. I'm not afraid.
Get your opinion on that. Thank you very much, Mike.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We got to let you go and do some more commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go to the phones here to Terry in California. Aloha, Terry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, when Pompeo says he's going to make sure that Hezbollah is eliminated from Lebanon, what he's saying is he wants to get rid of all the opposition for Israel to be able to come in and invade Lebanon, take what they want, take the water rights. It's just a roundabout way of saying it.
Yeah, that's exactly what he's saying. I mean, Hezbollah is the reason Israel has not already conquered Lebanon.
Exactly. They got repelled twice by Hezbollah. And the problem with Iran is, well, besides the banking issue, they're sending support to Hezbollah. And, that's why Iran's so bad. But on a different subject, why do we need immigration at all?
Well, there's always some immigration, and the legal immigration allows people to come to this country who are going to be a benefit to our society. And Trump apparently is talking about opening up a path to citizenship for the H-1B visa holders, because there are people out there from other countries who are, sad to say, better educated than our own students, especially in certain high-tech areas. Our colleges and universities have de-emphasized science and technology in favor of art history major and transgender studies. So we do need some of these people to come on in, and they do provide a benefit to our society. The problem is the illegal immigrants tend to be from the other end of the sociological spectrum. These are people who can't make it in their own country. In many cases, these are people who are fleeing prosecution. They're carrying dangerous, contagious diseases, and now they're being lured up here by the fact that California and New York are going to have free health care for illegal immigrants. Now, we legal American citizens, of course, are expected to pay through the nose for our health care, and we're also going to be paying for the health care for the illegal immigrants. So you can see how messed up this entire thing is.
Exactly. Well, let me ask you, what's your idea of immigration reform?
Immigration reform is basically that we only allow immigrants into this country who are properly vetted, that we know are not terrorists, that have skills that are going to be a benefit to our society. And we keep everybody else out.
Yeah, they can start with getting rid of that lottery program, I think.
Yeah, that's pretty darn silly, I think. That's very silly.
Yeah.
You know, there is no obligation to overpopulate this country. The only people who want to see that happen are the Democrats.
When I was growing up. No. I liked it better when it was 120 million instead of 360 million like it was when I was a kid.
Oh, I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. It's way too crowded. And again, the Democrats are counting on bringing in illegal immigrants and getting them to vote Democratic, even though it's not legal for non-citizens to vote. But that's why the Democrats are on the warpath against voter ID, so that the illegals can vote and nobody can stop them. Anyway, thanks an awful lot for the phone call, Terry. We got to take a break for station identification, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, we're talking about the Yellow Vest protesters, and as you know, they are trying to start a movement for all of the French people who support them, which polls say are about 80% of the French population support the Yellow Vests, to basically pull all their money out of the banks, to basically trigger a bank run. And still no indication as to how much support they're getting for that idea, but it's definitely causing a lot of fear within the banks and within the French government. And as of right now, the globalist opponents of the Yellow Vest movement, they're starting to pour money into Macron's police so they can buy more tear gas, more rubber bullets. And apparently France is now officially banning any and all Yellow Vest gatherings. So, folks, time to buy some red vests, I guess. Yeah, we can gather here. These are red vests. They're not yellow vests. But, I mean, basically, France is getting rid of any idea of democracy or freedom of speech or freedom of assembly. They're turning into a dictatorship. Now, the other day we were talking about the situation up in Canada where the Jewish National Fund had come under serious criticism because it was using some of the money that it was raising to fund infrastructure for the Israeli Defense Forces, which violates Canadian law. Well, apparently it was considered serious enough where the Canadian government is now conducting an audit of the Jewish National Fund to see how much of their charitable fundraising really went to charity and how much of it went to supporting the IDF. Now, we were talking about how down in the Senate, this pro-Israel S1 bill, which was about criminalizing BDS and sending more money to Israel, and they put it on hold because they realized the optics looked bad. Here you have a partially shut down government. You have all kinds of problems here in the United States of America. And the very, very first thing the brand new Senate does is pass a bill for Israel. For Israel. We must serve Almighty Israel. And the bill was voted on last Tuesday. It failed. McConnell actually tried to shove it through for a second vote. It failed again. And Rubio is out there saying the bill is crafted to help Israel. And he's also opposed to the Trump troop withdrawal from Syria because that would hurt Israel. So apparently Rubio's attitude is, who cares if Americans are being killed in Syria? We must serve Israel. Israel, oh Israel. which leads to this article out of Information Clearinghouse. Americans need a Congress that represents Americans. And this article focuses right on Marco Rubio, who claims to be a representative of Florida Republicans, but very clearly is out there representing the interests of Israel. No man can serve two masters, remember? And it's very obvious which one Mark Rubio is serving. And by the way, Marco Rubio and his colleagues, they need a refresher on that First Amendment. Because this bill that they're pushing to criminalize BDS it's unconstitutional. And if it goes to the Supreme Court, and it should go to the Supreme Court, it will be struck down as unconstitutional. Now, First Amendment rights belong to the people, not to the government. They're not allowed to modify it. They're not allowed to impose their views on the people or punish them for expressing views the government disagrees with. Two federal courts recently affirmed this, blocking laws in Arizona and Kansas that penalized individuals and companies for boycotting Israel. And this principle was famously tested back in the McCarthy era, when many state laws required government employees to declare in writing they were not members of the Communist Party or other subversive groups. If they failed to do so, they would lose their jobs. Okay, we're going to grab another phone call. Art off the grid. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, talking about this, what they got going on over there in France. I'm kind of curious, and it's amazing to me how many people don't seem to think this is of any kind of concern. Because, they're like, oh, well, we had a depression over here after the run on the banks here, and it didn't do anything. It really didn't have any effect on anybody except ourselves, and hell, we just went to war to solve that problem. Okay, well, yeah, sort of, kind of, but not really. Here's how this works out. Back then, we didn't have a global economy like we have now. So, folks, I want you to think about something. If they have a run on the banks over in France, and the result of that is anything even remotely resembling what we had in 1929, 1930, which led to the Great Depression here, this is going to be a global impact. Now, Mike, what do you think is going to happen here if they do it?
It all depends on how many American financial institutions are linked to those French banks, and to what and how much of an effect the withdrawals actually have. There are too many uncontrolled variables here to really be able to say what's going to happen. I think the model, though, is not 1929 so much as 2008, and there'll definitely be a scramble to keep everything looking good and keep it functioning. But at this point, France is obviously concerned enough about the possibility of a bank run that they're starting a crackdown on the yellow vests. And by the way, as a postscript, did you know here in the United States, it's actually illegal to call for a bank run? They already have a law against it. You cannot go out as a form of protest and say, Deutsche Bank is committing all these crimes and all these swindles here. I think we should have a bank run on them. They're going to arrest you.
I didn't know that was illegal here.
Yep, it is.
Wow. Hey, learned something new,
Well, that one needs a First Amendment challenge as well.
I'm curious because if this has any real significant impact globally, boy, we could be in for one hell of a rough ride. Anyway, just keep this in the back of your thoughts, folks. Be watching, be wary, be ready. Make sure you got the 3 Bs, because if you ain't got the 3 Bs and this thing goes really bad, somebody's in some deep F. Anyway, have a great one, Mike. We'll talk at you later.
All right, thanks an awful lot here. And we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Angela Merkel decided that it was time for her to visit Greece. Maybe she wanted to get out of Germany and get away from all the screaming and yelling about the open borders here. But she went down there to press on with more economic reforms and fiscal discipline. Oh, you Greek people, you got all of this horrible debt and you're not paying it off. But you need to remember, half of that debt resulted from this underhanded deal that Papandreou did with Goldman Sachs to use currency swaps to conceal the scale of Greece's debt as part of their becoming part of the European Union. And Goldman Sachs made a fortune off of this, of course. But the attitude coming out of the European Central Bank and the IMF is debt is debt is debt, and it doesn't matter if the debt was created through fraud committed by your government. You, the people, are still obligated to pay it. I'm sure the people probably have a different opinion about that. And Varoufakis basically described Merkel's visit as coming to inspect the desert she has made. Because the people of Greece are really struggling just to get on by. And the people up at the European Central Bank, they're just rolling in the dough, you know. Apparently, there was such a concern that there might be protests against Merkel that demonstrations were actually banned in Athens, which means the demonstrations went ahead anyway and led to violent clashes with the Athens police. So there's a lot of strong feelings. And you need to remember that Greece does not have a positive memory of Germany going all the way back to World War II. The Nazis occupied Greece, and they were not gentle. And you have to wonder what some people are thinking. This German Interior Minister, Horst Seehofer, who's Bavarian, said that Greece would be in better shape if it was still ruled by Germany. That, of course, did not go over very well with a lot of the Greek people. Now, Angela Merkel acknowledged the Nazis were very rude and ill-mannered when they were in Greece, but made no mention of reparations. Now, you remember Tsipras a while back has said, well, if Germany were to pay Greece the reparations for all the damage that was done, Greece would have enough money to square up with all of its debt obligations. And of course, Germany's not going to do that. But apparently, Greece's justice minister has said he's ready to enact a high court ruling that will allow Athens to seize German state-owned property as part of a compensation package to the Greek victims of a Nazi massacre during World War II. Now, there was a high court ruling back in 2000 that allowed for the confiscation of German property. It still stands. It remains valid. So there might be an issue there as well. Down in the Gaza Strip, the Israeli forces are still using lethal force against participants in the peaceful protests, the Great March of Return along the Gaza Strip borders. This is the 41st week along the eastern and northern border areas of the Gaza Strip, and the Israeli forces use force against civilians who participate in demonstrations during the Israeli incursions in the West Bank. In the Gaza Strip, the Israeli forces just this last week wounded 56 civilians, including 10 children, 3 women, 5 journalists, and 6 paramedics. One of those wounded was reported serious. In the West Bank, the Israeli forces wounded 10 civilians, including 4 children, a woman, a journalist, and a paramedic. So the brutality continues. Now, interestingly enough, over on Lebanon, the Israeli Defense Forces have been forced to suspend their Lebanese border operation for the second time in the last 24 hours after intervention by the United Nations. And apparently, the Lebanese army informed the UNIFIL forces that IDF troops had crossed the UN's blue line. The United Nations basically said, here's a line, you don't go past it. Israel did. Now, Israel still wants Hezbollah gone. They want to invade Lebanon. They want that Litani River. They got within 21 miles of it the last time they went into Lebanon here. But they didn't really do so well. And you have to wonder why, with all of these ultra-modern weapons supplied to Israel by the American taxpayer, why aren't they not fighting their own wars? Why aren't they doing better in the wars they do fight? Well, apparently, retired Major General Yitzhak Brick was serving as the Israel Defense Forces ombudsman for over a decade. And apparently, on a TV interview, he came on out and said that Israel's ground forces are grossly unprepared for a major conflict. They may have all the toys, they're not trained up on how to use them. Because, after all, that's what the Americans are for. Right? Okay, there's a new road in the Jerusalem area, Route 4370. And right down the middle of the road, there is a wall that basically just divides it into two. It's an 8-meter high wall. Now, the western side of the road serves Palestinians who cannot enter Jerusalem. The road's eastern side serves settlers who can now reach French Hill and Mount Scopus more easily from Anatot, Geva Binyamin, and Route 60 north of the city. The West Bank has many segregated roads, but none of them is divided along the entire length by an 8-meter high wall. See, Israel thinks walls are okay. For all those Democrats who support Israel, it's kind of weird. They think Israel's wall's okay. They bought a wall for Jordan last year. But Trump's wall, that's immoral. You know, I get a really weird feeling when I hear anybody in Congress talk about morality. It just weirds me out, and I don't know how to deal with it here. All right. More and more information is coming on out regarding this so-called integrity initiative that was supposedly to counter Russian propaganda, and then we find out that it itself is a propaganda machine. And they were going after people supportive of Brexit in Great Britain. And now it turns on out. New documents have revealed that this covert British military intelligence smear machine was meddling in the the midterm elections here in the United States. Okay, so it's time for sanctions on Great Britain. Because if the United States is going to sanction Russia over the unproven allegations of meddling in our elections, here we have documentation of Great Britain meddling in our elections. It's time for sanctions. Get out that sanction pen there, Donald, and just start sanctioning away here. Now, we have been talking for a very long time about the poor quality and high cost of America's weaponry. And I think this article from Bloomberg illustrates a huge part of the problem. The United States Air Force has accepted the first 8 of 179 planned KC-46 aerial refueling tankers. It's a $44 billion program. It is 2 years late, and the planes being delivered are flawed. There's a camera system that's supposed to be used during refueling operations, and apparently it doesn't work. And they're saying it's going to take 4 more years to upgrade this system to get it to work. So here you have the U.S. government plunking all this money down for Boeing and willingly accepting a defective product. And I'm very concerned for the crews who have to fly that plane and operate that refueling system. Now, turning to the economy, there's a story that just came on through here from foreign press, not here in the United States. You're not going to see this on the U.S. media. But basically, the foreign press is saying right now the United States is at a very high risk of recession. And part of it is the trade war. Part of it is the shutdown. Over at the Federal Reserve, Chairman Jerome Powell is expressing concern about the ballooning amount of United States debt. Well, Chairman Powell, the reason the United States is hopelessly mired in debt is because of the Federal Reserve, which by design produces more debt than money with which to pay the debt. So Powell is out there saying it's the debt is a long-run issue we definitely need to face, and ultimately we have no choice but to face. The translation being, you, the American people, have to give the Federal Reserve even more of your money. By the way, the latest word now is, because of the economic realities, the Federal Reserve has now taken the expected March rate hike off the table. And this is going to fuel those rumors or support those rumors that were floating around about how there might even be a rate cut in March to try and get things back on track. Meanwhile, Moody's downgrade of PG&E did in fact trigger this $800 million collateral call and prompted a liquidity crisis. So it looks like PG&E is on the way out. They're going to be looking for somebody to bail them out, to buy out the assets here. Maybe it should go back to being a public utility. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, over at Wall Street, let's see. Okay. HSBC Holdings has agreed to pay $30 million to settle litigation by investors who accused 11 big banks of rigging the roughly $9 trillion with a T government agency bond market from 2009 to 2015. And the settlement with the British bank was made public late on Wednesday, rather. This is the third bank to settle after Deutsche Bank and Bank of America. And they agreed to pay $48 million and $17 million and cooperate with the plaintiffs. Now, I mean, when you look at the trillions that they made, this few $million fine, this is nothing. This is a joke being played on the American people. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Steve Elkins, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Mike, I just turned TV on real quick here. I get ready to head out to work, but I see that Governor DeSantis, the newly elected governor here in Florida, has called on the suspension of Scott Israel, who was involved in the whole Parkland shooting.
Yes.
Investigation there, or a cover-up, so to speak. So I understand now that Scott Israel has actually resigned. So I thought I'd just pass that on to you. Maybe you can do a little research to see what happened there. But there was a lot going on with that whole investigation or cover-up there in Parkland, and I thought you might be interested in that.
Yeah, I'd seen where Scott Israel was being let go, and I don't know whether it's a question if he resigned or he's being fired. But in all the articles about it, they weren't saying what it was specifically about. But that may emerge in the coming weeks.
That's it for me, Mike. Have a great show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Getting on back here to the economic news, AT&T is planning yet more layoffs, even though they get tens of billions of dollars in tax breaks and government favors. And these telecom monopolies, again, it's another racket. They demand all manner of tax cuts, subsidies, all kinds of perks in exchange for jobs that never actually materialize, broadband network expansions that somehow never actually arrive. And it's all politics here. Now, as you know, the corporate media has been screaming about how wages and salaries are going up in the United States of America. And that may or may not be true. We get lied to so much about the economy, it's kind of hard to know. But for the moment, let's stipulate that it's true. It's not necessarily helping the average American because the cost of living is rising faster than the wages and salaries. And so the standard of living continues to decline. And the message goes forth from Wall Street to all America: you must make do with less so that we can have more. You must make do with less so that we can have more. You must make do with less so that we can have more. Turning to more immigration news, Mexico is reinforcing its southern border due to reports of yet another migrant caravan forming in Central America, which is set to leave within days, heading for the U.S.-Mexico border. And Mexico's Interior Secretary Olga Sanchez Cordero said the country's 12 entry points and 379 known illegal crossings will be strengthened to stem the flow of migrants crossing into the country. Now, if you look at Mexico's southern border, they've got a nice fence down there, a really solid one. So they want these situation under control. We've mentioned recently that a lot of these migrants who are showing up at the United States are carrying serious illnesses, drug-resistant tuberculosis, scabies, HIV, H1N1, one known case of bubonic plague. And here is where it gets a little weird. This is a story out of rents.com. Apparently, the CDC is taking these seriously ill migrants and they're flying them into the United States to U.S. hospitals for treatment. Now, I'm sorry, these people are very ill. Some of these people were ill before they even headed for the border. They heard that there was free medical care for illegal immigrants up here. Why are we on the hook for this? And you know, they're talking about these illegal children, sick children, and the kids get very ill, and the parents try and sue the United States government. They were the ones who chose to bring those kids here. We have got to stop handing out the free stuff. That's what's drawing the illegal immigrants here. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to take a phone call from Mike in Colorado. Mike, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I just want to correct you on the bank runs. Yeah, well, I've never seen a law that says you can't be on a radio show as the guy there and tell people to do a bank run, but people can take money from the bank and take their money out, and you can actually put that as a positive thing. So I want to leave it at that. I don't think you're correct as far as a law. There's also a law. Bush put a law in that you can't melt down pennies. I remember as part of the Patriot Act, because pennies now, if you have old pennies in copper, they're worth like 3 cents for every penny.
Yes.
He made a law there that you can't melt down pennies. However, yeah, I guess from you sitting behind the seat of the chair there, you probably can't demand people to do a bank run. That probably would get a SWAT team on you. However, you can advise people to take their money out of the bank, and I'll let you go.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot. I mean, we have been advising people to only have as much money in the bank as they need to meet their immediate obligations. But that's something that's happening gradually over time. The law specifically says, and again, I'll research this and I'll be back here on Monday with this. The law says trying to organize everybody to pull their money out of the bank on the same day is illegal. And I don't know why Bush put in a law about melting down the pennies, because there's already a law against defacing the public currency, of which obviously the coinage is part of that. And I know the law wasn't being enforced, because you've probably been in amusement parks and things. You'll see those machines where you'll put a copper penny in there and a quarter, and you turn this big crank and it squishes the penny out with an imprint of wherever you are. And it's a very popular collector's item. Nobody ever really screams about that. Unfortunately, with the new pennies, which are plated aluminum, it doesn't really work all that well. So, but again, I'll take a look at that. Okay, getting on back to immigration and the rest of it. This is kind of weird. The founder of the French Green Party has come on out saying that Europeans must have fewer children because you've got to make way for all those Muslim migrants. I mean, that's how completely out of control this situation is. Over in Athens, Greece, as if they're not already dealing with a lot, there was this Orthodox priest noticed a motorcycle was illegally parked in the garden of the temple. And when he went to complain to the owner of the motorcycle, the owner and one other gentleman beat him up. They're Syrian migrants. Up in Sweden, apparently 2 men were arrested for torturing a dog to death and making a video about it. And apparently these guys were arrested, and they got the mobile phones and they found the video of these 2 guys basically torturing this dog. Of course, we can't talk about that because criticizing the migrants in Sweden, that's now a hate crime. I'm sorry. When a dog is involved, I'm sorry. That's it. That's over the line. The dog, that's really over the line here. Remember, not too long ago, there was this brutal attack on this Alternative for Germany member of parliament, Frank Magnitz. The Antifa group have now taken credit for that. They put this guy in the hospital, and I would be very surprised if he did not suffer significant brain damage as well. Alrighty, I'm going to skip on down because we've got the Lady Claire coming up at the top of the hour. I want to hit human-caused global warming because it is very, very intense out there. In fact, there was this interesting article that came out of The Sun. The headline reads, Continent on Ice. The death toll from the European snow chaos hits 17 as Germany sends in the army to try and just take care of keeping the roads open, rescuing people who are stranded. Temperatures have plummeted to 23 degrees below 0 centigrade. And apparently heavy snow continues to fall. Hundreds of flights have been canceled from all of this human-caused global warming. 16-year-old German-Australian boy was killed in an avalanche while skiing with his parents in Austria. And apparently Austria is really taking the brunt of the storm. The highest red warnings for storm conditions are in place in Germany and Austria, with up to 6 more feet of snow expected before the weekend. So it's looking like, let's see, Austria is expected to face 10 feet of snow in the next few days. The fierce winter weather continues to strike Central Europe. Over in London, they're expecting snow there, and they're bracing for a record-breaking winter. And have you noticed how over the last several years, each winter breaks the records from the previous winter? We're definitely getting colder and colder. And they're saying that this cold snap, this record-breaking cold snap, is going to trend through all the way into March. Pardon me. Apparently, over in northeastern Switzerland and the town of Schwagalp, there was this hotel, Santis, that was hit with a major avalanche. A 1,000-foot wall of snow basically crashed into this hotel and right into the restaurant where guests were eating. 3 people have been injured. 25 cars are just totally buried. Police are searching for missing people. Forecasters warn Europe's whiteout will last well into next week. Down in Athens, Greece, boy, Athens is in the news a lot. Snow has fallen on the Greek ruins, the Parthenon. They're all covered in snow. Now, the good news is it's snowing in Utah, Tahoe, and Jackson. The ski resorts are open for business. Everybody's happy out there with their skis and toboggans. And the downside is, though, it is snowing in Lebanon, and the refugee camps are covered in snow. These are tents. Apparently 151 sites that are home to 11,000 Syrians have been heavily affected, according to the UN Refugee Agency. Now, one of the big talking points that we got from the global warming people, especially Al Gore, was how the Arctic ice is melting. The polar caps are going away. Those poor polar bears are drowning. They're endangered species. Well, wrong again, Al. Apparently, this year is blowing away all records for Arctic sea ice volume gain. Huge amounts of new ice. And by the way, the polar bears are not going extinct. In fact, their numbers are so great, they're now considered pest animals again. You remember all these stories about polar bears are going to be drowning. Polar bears float. They can even sleep while floating. That fur of theirs, the individual strands are hollow. They have air inside. And it's an evolutionary adaptation that helps keep them warm. It's a dead air space, and it's also very, very buoyant. Polar bears have been observed able to swim distances of over 60 miles. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Francis in Quebec, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Just to touch on what you were just talking about, I see that in 2018, there was 283 days where there were no sunspots.
Yeah. Yeah, that's...
So all this stuff about, this is, we got to stop doing this, stop doing... This is all solar generated.
It is. The sun is the dominant determinator of climate here on Earth. The secondary one is the shape of the Earth's orbit and the tilt of the orbital axis. And Earth's orbit oscillates between circular and elliptical over roughly 100,000 year periods. And when the orbit is elliptical, because of Kepler's laws of orbital motions, Earth will spend more time at the far end of the ellipse, further away from the sun, and you get the ice ages. Then as the orbit becomes more circular, Earth gets to spend more time closer to the sun, and you get the interglacials, which is where we are right now. But this, this idea that our plastic bags and our SUVs are going to broil the planet Earth, it was nonsense from the very, very beginning. And these people knew it. They're just playing politics. Back in the 1990s when this started, the Earth actually was warming up. And they said, okay, great. We're going to take something that is happening naturally, which is climate change. We're going to declare it a crisis. We're going to blame it on human activity. And we're going to guilt everybody out of their money and their obedience. And they put a huge amount of effort into this.
They wanted $1 trillion a year.
Say again?
They wanted $1 trillion a year out of North Americans. For what? What's that going to do?
Oh, because we're climate sinners. Americans, we're the worst of the climate offenders. No, we're not. It was another hoax. It was another hoax. Anybody who says there's no such thing as massive conspiracies to defraud the general public, we've got one right here in front of you. And again,
speaking of conspiracies, I'm very happy to say that there's a grand jury in New York that's finally going to investigate explosions of 9/11.
Well, I'm glad to see that it's moving forward as well, but I can guarantee you right now, the perpetrators of 9/11 are going to find some way to derail this or stop it. They can't let it move forward. They even though the majority of the American people
now are conspiracy theorists.
Yeah, even though the majority of the American people,
everyone knows Kennedy got it wasted.
Even though the majority of the American people no longer believe the official story of 9/11, the government has to maintain the illusion, maintain the lie. And if this grand jury actually were to say, yes, there were explosives in the buildings, they're not going to let it happen. I mean, at one point, I think it was... I can't remember who it was, basically was saying that the terrorists had snuck into the World Trade Towers just a few days before 9/11 and planted those explosives. I mean, that's how desperate they were to cover this up. But anybody who knows controlled demolitions, especially the one that we can see clearly on Building 7, you don't do that in a day or two. It takes weeks to set something like that up.
Well, for me, the real one now, like I used to, like Building 7 was the one that woke me up in 2003. When somebody showed me that, I just about fell out of my chair. But since then, if you watch Rick Siegel's What I Saw, and he was a quant on Wall Street who took his video camera and his transistor radio down to the New Jersey shore and watched the whole event and filmed it with the timestamp of the radio broadcast. And then he went to Columbia University, and then there's also a photographer who died when buildings 1 and 2 collapsed on him.
Yes.
But they got his camera, and it shows clearly that building 6 had already blown up. The roof blew out. It's only a 10-story building. The roof blew off, all the windows were charred, and if you look at it from the satellite photograph, it's got this huge square hole right down to the foundations in it. That's where the Bank of Nova Scotia had all that gold that was stolen. And you can see 15 minutes before the 2 towers collapsed on it, the roof blew off. Rick Siegel went to Columbia University and got the seismograph, and he showed that there are huge bombs from the seismographic readings. Huge bombs went off inside Building 6.
Yep.
I wanted to talk about something really important, though, and I'd like all your listeners to go to voltairenet.org, and Thierry Meyssan is actually the first guy you could almost say he's the first 9/11 conspiracy theorist, because he's the guy that showed the hole in the Pentagon was too small for a plane. And he's got he saw the Syrian war coming before anybody did, and now he's talking about the end of the Syrian war. And this gets involved with a lot of politics, because the Syrian war in Afghanistan, this is CENTCOM. And as you know, the whole world is divided up into CENTCOM, Eurocom, AsiaCom, PACCOM, NorthCom. We're in NorthCom. And then there's SouthCom in South America. And what he's saying is, now that this war is winding down, and Trump has ended it with Mathis, and it is coming to an end, but there's going to be some people that stay in place. But the main thing is now is they're building up for a new war. And this new war is going to be in the Caribbean basin.
Yes.
And all the chess pieces are moving in. You probably reported on this. I haven't been able to listen to as much as I'd like, but you probably reported on it that 2 Russian blackjack bombers flew 10,000 miles and landed in Venezuela. And they're building an air base there in Venezuela. Yes. And they're openly saying that they're going to defend Venezuela. But also, what's the guy's name? The guy that Bolsonaro, the guy that just got voted in Brazil.
Yes.
He is totally tight in with Benjamin Netanyahu. And even his sons are seen wearing Mossad T-shirts in the public. And the U.S., when he was sworn in, Benjamin Netanyahu flew to Brazil to be at the swearing in. And the U.S. went to him, what's his name? Who's the head of the State Department now?
Mike Pompeo. Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State.
Yeah, and he wanted to build $1.5 billion air base in Brazil. And also, you may have noticed that in Britain now with Brexit, some of the top people in the government are saying, now that we're separating from Europe, we're going to reestablish the British Empire. And they want to go, they're going to be going big time into British Guiana, which borders on Venezuela. Mm-hmm. And what's happening is they want Brazil and Colombia and Guyana to attack first Venezuela, because Venezuela is already under a state of siege, which is illegal because it's an act of war. And by the way, the famine there is not being caused by socialism. All the big corporations that control the supermarkets and food deliberately withheld all the food from Venezuela as to create a state of tension.
Well, Venezuela's been a target of U.S. economic warfare for decades. Anyway, Francis, I got to let you go. We got to take a commercial break. We're coming up on the top of the hour, and the lovely Lady Claire. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're going to try and fit in 2 phone calls before the top of the hour and the lovely Lady Claire. The first one is from Tom in Florida. Tom, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Michael, good show. Your last caller, he said there was going to be a war in the Caribbean. We've been having a war with the Caribbean for the last 60 years with Cuba. and all the other dictators of Nicaragua. So, I don't know where he's coming off on that one. Yeah, but he's got a point, I guess, with the Russians. But Venezuela, yeah, it's another whole ball game. That's because you got socialist wackos like me. We have them here in the United States with Bernie Sanders and Cortez abroad. We have the same thing if they ever got the real power. But Michael, the reason I called your show is this. I don't know if you had a chance to see the round table talking the White House today with Trump, with people from the Border Patrol. And did you see the lady from San Diego?
No, I didn't get to watch that. I didn't get to watch that.
Okay, well, I can tell you the lady said they're using these high school kids as mules. They're bringing drugs from the high schools in San Diego. They're paying them. They're dying left and right from fentanyl and all these other heroin. And these are high school kids. And I'm like, wait a minute. Now, if this and you have Pelosi and Schumer saying this is a manufactured crisis. Now, if 5 million Muslims are running into Israel, Wasserman, Schultz, and Schumer would never allow that. But here our borders being breached by millions. There's 40 million illegals in this country right now. That's the real war we're looking at. The war's not with Russia and all that. The wars they're taking over. They're turning the demographic of the nation of the United States to brown. That's exactly what's happening here. Let's not kid ourselves. You can't beat around the bush on this. They're literally, for the last 30 years, the Democratic Party and the Republicans with their the Better Business Bureau and all that, bringing all these cheap labor in here, and they've literally wiped out the whole cities. California's gone. You got almost 6 million illegals in the state now. California
at
will never
least
go
that many.
Republican. It's going to be a blue state. And Michael, the real war started 40 years ago when they allowed this immigration invasion with that guy Cuellar, who was a Zionist Jew, and Kennedy, a Irish Catholic. It all started in 1965 with the immigration law. I read it up. And that was the turning point of the United States being wiped out. Now, what's going on now currently with the immigration, Schumer and Pelosi and all these Democrats should be held for treason. They should be arrested for supporting sanctuary cities. There's no such thing as a sanctuary city.
No, there isn't. I mean, they're in violation of Title VIII. Arrest them under the existing laws. Title VIII. I don't know what's wrong with Donald Trump.
Well, I think Donald Trump's going to have to build a wall with the Army Corps of Engineers. I don't care what the rhinos or the Democrats, the Democrats start screaming about. He's got to build that wall, and he's got to start deporting. Now he's talking about visas. Come on. Right now, the United States can't even absorb 250 million people. We got 350 million, and they're always screaming about environment and the globe. Michael, the main thing is if Donald Trump gets this wall built by the Army Corps of Engineers, 8 years down the road, a Democrat gets in there. He's going to try to do something about the global warming. Oh, we're going to tax the taxpayers trillions of dollars for the global warming. And let me ask you a question, Michael. With global warming, don't you make more food when the world's hot instead of cold?
Yes, absolutely.
To feed more people?
If you look at the Roman and medieval warming periods, there were times of tremendous prosperity and the flowering of civilization. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 3. And for those of you watching on YouTube, this gorgeous creature sitting next to me is the lovely Lady Claire, who likes to join us on hour number 3 on Fridays with her unique perspective on the world. Before we get into her, though, we've got one more caller waiting on the line. Daniel in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Claire. Hey, Mike. It's such a pleasure to be on the show with you guys. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
Yes.
We can hear just fine.
Hey, I was just going to see if thanks for saving me till last, because this will start your segment off on a little bit of a light note. Is there? I'm not a young man, but people of my parents' generation tend to call me a young man. Is there something about Earl Scruggs that I'm missing that would tie him in to Google and their good graces? I mean, I thought Earl Scruggs was an entirely wholesome entertainer from a time gone by. I'm from Carthage, Texas, where Gentleman Jim Reeves is from, and so I know a lot about bluegrass, and I'm just wondering, what are they trying to do as they posture for the good old folks by putting Earl Scruggs up on the front page of Google?
Well, every day they try and have something up there on the front page of Google, some kind of a banner. And I don't know if today is his birthday or not. I mean, I'm very familiar with Earl Scruggs. I play bluegrass banjo myself. So I really don't know. It may be
a little wholesome for their tastes.
Well, maybe they're trying to polish their image, okay?
Yeah.
Well,
All
I
right.
tell you, thanks so much for taking my call, guys. It's a pleasure to talk to you. I'm not very good on the radio, so I'll let you go. But thank you so much for taking my call.
All right,
Bless you
thanks
for
an awful
calling.
lot. We're going to let you go here, and we're going to start with the lovely Lady Claire.
Mm-hmm.
And what is your first story?
The first story is that Fiat Chrysler is going to be paying nearly $800 million in a settlement over emissions heating charges.
Oh.
Now, what does this mean if they're taking a financial hit? Nobody goes to jail. The rich rarely eat their own. And I would be willing to bet you that if the next time something like this happens, either in the automotive industry or the aircraft industry, someone should be in jail if there's a fail like that, Mike.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the way corporate law is set up, the only way somebody can be sent to jail, they have to prove criminal intent, like they did with the case with Bernie Madoff,
Yeah.
where they went after him.
Yep.
But generally, as a rule of thumb, the people at the top of corporations are considered untouchables. Earlier in the show, we were talking about this huge scandal about rigging that involved HSBC and Bank of America and Deutsche Bank, and it was a $9 trillion market they were playing around in, and they're paying just pennies on the dollar.
A token.
And
Yeah.
of course, they'll take much of it off their taxes as a business loss, and the rest will be passed on to their customers as increased fees.
Yeah, I really get so annoyed because people who make the bad mistakes of signing off on bad decisions, something should happen to them other than financial, you know?
Well, I agree. Now, I am rather reassured. They did nail that former CEO of a pharmaceutical company for running a kickback scheme to incentivize doctors to prescribe these addictive opioid medications.
Oh, yeah.
And in this case, he definitely did wrong. They were able to prove there was criminal intent to just make money, and so he's going away. But you're right. It would be nice to see some of these CEOs that are behind things like contaminated vaccines, wind up in the hooskow.
Yeah, I really think so. And I note that you touched on the U.S. withdrawal from Syria.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If we are to believe what was in the news today, it looks like this was an argument between Trump, Bolton, and Pompeo, where Trump said we're withdrawing from Syria, and Pompeo and Bolton basically tried to head it off by saying, no, there are conditions on it, and Trump came back and said, no, there isn't. And again, from where I'm sitting, Bolton and Pompeo are being insubordinate. They should be fired. If I were the president, I would have fired him by now.
And what was that wonderful line from The Apprentice? You're fired.
Yeah. Where is that guy from The Apprentice who was ready just to fire anybody for the slightest transgression? We need that Trump back.
Oh, I hope we will get him back. But there have been so many decisions so negative on this from various web and print sources, about why this is a bad thing. I think the biggest thing had to do with the Israeli hold on the Golan.
That's a big part of it.
Yeah.
The other part of it, of course, is that the war agenda doesn't want to admit that basically we lost in Syria, even though Trump said, Syria was lost a long time ago.
Yeah.
They don't want to admit that we're in Afghanistan, that we're losing in Afghanistan. So they're going to go on throwing money and the lives of our young soldiers into these two places to get ground on up so they can go on saying, well, maybe we haven't won, but at least we haven't lost. And of course, there is the larger agenda that Syria is supposed to be the springboard for the eventual attack on Iran. And it was interesting in Mike Pompeo's speech in Cairo, where he basically redefined the U.S. purpose in Syria as saying to get rid of all the Iranian boots on the ground.
Yep.
So it used to be Assad is gassing his own people. Then it was we're there to get ISIS, and now that ISIS is gone, well, we're just going to, we're going to go after the Iranians here. And so the excuses are always changing, but the war goes on forever.
Yeah, and there was one very stinging from the New York Times. The source was not identified But they said of the withdrawals, Trump is God's gift that keeps on giving to Putin. I don't see that.
I don't either.
I can't. I'm trying to wrap my head around this alleged logic, and it's not going anywhere.
No, they're just pushing that whole, Trump is a Russian puppet.
Yeah.
These days, the corporate media really isn't worth a whole heck of a lot. I mean, some of these, say, like CNN.
Yeah.
And I'd say they're only good to wrap fish in, but you can't bend those monitors the way you could with the newspaper.
No, you definitely can't. And sinking to one of the lowest of the lows, our wonderful favorite, Nancy Pelosi, was asked about Trump's policies and Russian President Putin. And she told MSNBC's Joy Reid, I think the president's relationship with thugs all over the world is appalling. Vladimir Putin, really? Really? I think it's dangerous. But Mike, to me, not talking. Who was it? Winston Churchill said it was better to jaw than wah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we need this because the lack of communication is what can create horrible starts to wars that shouldn't have happened. And we've got so much that I'm sensing going on here underneath the surface and kind of burbling in its own way.
Well, again, Pelosi is thinking 2020. To heck with the country, to heck with the people. She's thinking 2020, and they're going to keep this Russian collusion, Russian link going over the next 2 years.
Yeah. It's, I think that Congress needs to be reminded of the fact that we, the people, hired them to take care of us, not their corporate buddies, not foreign heads of state.
No,
us, we the people.
In Congress view, we the people are there to pay all the bills.
Yep.
But yeah, they work for their corporate masters and for Israel. And we lost this country when the laws that limited political contributions were slowly eroded away, especially that Citizens United decision that just basically opened the floodgate for massive corporate spend. To declare a corporation a legal person.
Hello.
A corporation isn't a person. It's buildings, it's machinery, it's inventory. What you're doing is you're saying that corporate CEOs are now allowed to have a larger say in the political operation of this country than ordinary American citizens. That's exactly the real result of Citizens United.
Yeah, that was a real tragedy for true democracy in this country. It really was.
Yes, it was.
And now we are seeing that politicians, I think, are basically considered assets of the companies who pay them for various favorable legislation to go their way.
Yep. I still think we ought to put everybody in Congress in NASCAR flame suits.
Okay,
and so on the patches of everybody that they're actually working for, like Sheldon Adelson Casinos, and, Monsanto, and so that when we see them up there making a speech about something, we're immediately reminded who it is they're really working for.
Of course.
And of course, the Star of David on every single one of them.
Probably, yes. Now, Mike, I have a question to ask you at this point in our show. How much do you think Erdogan's threats about imminent invasion, which he's still talking about, by the way, played into President Trump's decision?
Well, Trump was talking about pulling out of Syria in last March, and he got talked out of it.
Yeah.
Which is, again, another reason why I think he's proving to be a very, very weak leader. And apparently he still can't quite come to a decision about whether he's going to declare a state of emergency or not at the southern border. But Trump has indicated he wanted to pull out of Syria long before Erdogan started talking tough, although it's no secret that Turkey has been wanting to take care of the Kurds for quite a long time. They've been a pain in the neck, not just for Turkey, but for Iran and a lot of people in that region. Personally, I think somebody ought to carve out a country of their own, and then they'll calm down.
Yeah, the idea of an independent Kurdistan has been floated a lot.
Well, that's what the United States was offering to the Kurds when they were using the Kurds as proxies in Syria. But now that the Syrian war is winding down and the U.S. did not win, I think the U.S. is just going to abandon the Kurds. and say, you know, those of you who can get here to the United States, we'll get you set up with a 7-Eleven store or something.
Yep.
You know, for all your command personnel, but everybody else, well, you know, good night, you're on your own. Thank you.
Yeah. Apparently, Israel's main objection in preventing a swift U.S. exit was also made explicit by Netanyahu, who openly stated on Twitter that Israel's push to obtain sovereignty over occupied Golan Heights, which is internationally recognized as part of Syria, was the driving factor between Israel's recent efforts to dramatically slow down Trump's plan for an immediate withdrawal of U.S. troops currently occupying Syrian territory illegally.
And we need to emphasize that last part and remind everybody again, Iran and Russia are in Syria with the permission of and by the invitation of the legitimate government of Syria. The United States is not. They're basically running all over that country, flying all over that country, bombing all over that country with this attitude that somehow the United States automatically has a right to go into any country they want to and do whatever they want to. And that, of course, is a violation of international law. Syria wants the United States to leave. Iraq is now talking about the United States should leave. We're re-entering an era of Yankee go home all over the globe.
But we're creating the problem, and that's, you know, I wish more people understood that.
That's what we're good at.
Yes, I know. Yes, as in Carlin's routine. You remember it, yes.
Yeah, the one about we bomb people because we're good at it.
Right, right. And apparently, right after Trump made the announcement, last month, Israel's government announced that it would dramatically rev up its direct involvement in the Syrian conflict in the U.S. absence. Now, we haven't seen a lot of that yet, but Syria's getting threatened by Israel, and Israel is very unwilling to see foreign pressure on Damascus reduced.
See, that's the way Israel does it. Israel's a master at let's you and him fight. They don't like to fight their own wars. And we had an article that came through the show earlier today how a former top-ranking military in Israel is saying that the IDF ground troops, despite all the modern weapons that they've been given by the American taxpayer, they're really not prepared for major ground conflicts, because Israel's agenda is we get somebody else to fight our wars for us. And as you correctly pointed out, despite all the rhetoric coming out of Israel, we have not seen a lot of Israel incursions into Syria, especially since the arrival of the S-300.
Right.
Now, we know that Ukraine has delivered one of the S-300 radar stations to the United States for evaluation to see if it really can detect the F-35.
Right.
The only problem with that is that Ukraine's version of the S-300 is an older model. And we don't know what improvements Russia has made to the ones delivered to Syria. And I can imagine that Lockheed and the U.S. government are asking Israel, don't fly into Syria with the F-35, because if one of those gets shot down, that's the end of the party. Everybody's going to be canceling their orders, because absence its stealth capabilities, it's a terrible aircraft. It can be out dogfought by 1970s vintage aircraft. It's still not complete. It's like we were talking about this KC-46 tankers that the Air Force is accepting. They're accepting it. It's still not complete. It's got parts that aren't working. The same thing is true of the F-35. It doesn't have all the whiz-bang yet. And there's already too much whiz-bang. It's way too heavy. It's underpowered. The only thing it has is its stealth. And if it's demonstrated that stealth really doesn't work, this trillion-dollar boondoggle, it's going to be over.
Right. And speaking of Mike Pompeo, when you think he couldn't double down any harder on really crushing the U.S. esteem in the Middle East and elsewhere, he also has announced, drumroll please, there is going to be an international summit on Iran to address its destabilizing influence. And this is going to happen probably next month on Middle East security and Iran's regional influence. in what appears to be an attempt to kind of calm down Israel and Saudi Arabia. And in total, apparently, Pompeo will be visiting 5 nations, including Gulf GCC countries, where he is expected to continue a very heavy anti-Iranian message. Mike, I can't understand this. What is Iran supposed to have done in the first place?
Well, they're cutting into our action, because if anybody's going to destabilize the Middle East, it'll be the United States of America.
Yeah.
And Pompeo is probably going to get the same reaction on this tour that he got from his speech at in Cairo,
where just stank.
People were just ridiculing him for coming on out and saying, we're here as liberators, not occupiers, and people just sort of ripped it apart.
Yeah.
And no, Iran is not the destabilizing influence in the Middle East. That is, the gold medal for that is the United States, with Israel taking a close silver.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And, but Israel has wanted Iran smashed up the way Iraq was smashed up. And I'm sure the phone lines are burning up between Tel Aviv and Washington, D.C., where Netanyahu was saying, do it. You get Iran from me. You go kill Iran from me.
But here's the kicker.
Yeah.
The U.S. has also warned Iran to cease its quote-unquote illegal space program to launch satellites into orbit, saying the ballistic technology used in tests and launches only serve to further Iran's nuclear delivery campaign.
Capability. Okay, here's the problem with that. First of all, Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. They've never had nuclear weapons. Nobody ever documented they were building nuclear weapons. Okay, Iran's ballistic missiles were never part of the P5+1 arrangement, and Iran has every right to space exploration enjoyed by every other country on Earth.
Amen.
There is absolutely no foundation to declare that Iran's launching of satellites into orbit is illegal. It's just more demonization and another unreasonable demand, trying to get Iran to say, okay, enough is enough, to open the door for some kind of an attack. And I don't know, maybe they'll take Iran's launching of a space satellite. Oh, that's an act of war. They went ahead and they did it. And it'll be on. But we know that the American deep state and Israel have been lusting, and that's the appropriate word to use here. They've been lusting for war with Iran for a very, very long time.
And one thing I want to mention before
we have
the
to
break.
take a break for commercials.
We'll do it
We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And Claire, if you would kindly pick up where you left off.
Yeah, one thing about the timing of this conference is very interesting to me. It is supposed to be held within a month, which does give Israel another nearly 60 days before the 9 April Israeli elections. Now, if I were a betting human being, I would be willing to bet that Israel, if their AG does not indict Netanyahu for corruption, that any military act against Iran, which will probably mean against Russia as well, may well happen in March. That's the time frame I'm feeling. What do you think?
Well, I think there may be a military action of some kind. It may not be against Iran. It may be against the Golan. But right now, Netanyahu's lead in the polls is narrowing against, it's slim and getting slimmer all the time. And so he may want to rely on this idea of, you don't change presidents in the middle of a war, and he'll, crank up something explosive. Maybe he'll go back into Gaza.
Ouch, ouch.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, there's been another development with the, how do you pronounce this again?
Huawei
sales director arrested in Poland over spying allegations. It looks like the U.S. Is sort of putting their chips together as bargaining chips for the Russian that they have. The
Huawei thing actually began between Canada and China. And the U.S., of course, has this woman that they claim has confessed to being a spy. Russia is saying they feel that she was coerced, that she wasn't a spy. She legitimately had a job, in the United States that involved, the NRA. And then, of course, the U.S. has grabbed a Russian saying that they were spying. It's tit for tat, and to be very honest, it's actually very childish.
Yes, it is.
It really is very, very childish.
Yeah. And I think that these people with China and Russia are going to be used as bargaining chips.
Yes.
Ultimately. Now, this really kind of amazed me. Apparently, the U.S. government has approved thousands of child bride requests. I mean, come on, folks. Aren't we about having national values of protecting our kids and making sure that they can make full use of their lives? I mean, this is insane, Michael. A 49-year-old man applied for admission for a 15-year-old girl. That's not right.
Well, in our culture, it's not seen as right. In theirs, it is. And it's a gray area because they're not asking to marry these underage girls inside the United States. They were already legally married in their home
country of origin. Yeah.
And so there's a certain requirement for reciprocity in recognizing marriages. We saw the same thing with the issue of gay marriage.
Yeah.
Those states that started to legalize gay marriage, other states were obligated to recognize them if the gay couples moved into the other state.
Yeah.
And so I certainly don't approve of it. But again, in their culture, it's normal.
Yeah.
And again, because they were married in their home country, it is actually legal for the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement to do this in this country.
Wow.
Pardon me.
It just, it kind of blew me away when I read that. Thousands? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. We have Israel doing something like this to Russia, and those who can't see my feed, What the Israeli Defense Company did was sell a suicide drone to Azerbaijan in Central Asia. Now, this is the first case of its kind, and it's a very well-known Israeli defense company. Elbit Systems has sold a suicide drone to Azerbaijan. Mike, could I have this back, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, you got to make sure that this is over here.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
Now, it's the first sale of its kind, and Elbit Systems is a drone manufacturer which sells weapons to the Israeli military and sold what they call their Sky Striker drone to Azerbaijan, making the Caucasian country the first non-Israeli recipient of the weapon. Now, this is also known as a suicide or kamikaze drone. What can it do? It will destroy a target on impact, and according to the JP, it travels at a speed of about 100 knots, which is 185.2 kilometers per hour, which is still pretty fast.
Well, it's fast for a drone, not for a warplane, but basically it's just another guided bomb. And I know they're trying to make a big deal about this being high tech, but as a matter of fact, guided bombs were used by both sides in World War II.
Yeah.
Where there would be a glider that was remotely controlled, and it had a TV camera that sent TV pictures back to the airplane where the controller was located.
But the reason this is a problem, this is a left-handed way of Israel getting back at Russia for the S-300s on Syria. The Nagorno-Karabakh dispute has not yet been settled, and there have been wars over this region by Azerbaijanis.
Okay. We got to take another break for commercials.
All right.
And we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And Claire, what do you have next for us?
Next, apparently, I hope to some of their moral chagrin, UK councils have invested £566 million in arms firms linked to Yemen war. I mean, they know what's happening with these weapons. A number of people around the world, including yours truly, has been posting consistently visual confirmation of civilian deaths, famine, illness. And it just really bothers me.
Yeah,
that
but it's
people,
making money, and as long as it's making money, that's a good thing. It's making money for us. Obviously, it's not doing very well for the people on the receiving end of those weapons.
I have to wonder where consciousness goes when it comes to money.
I think when you're dealing with that level of greed and the money junkies, conscience is gone completely, because it really is an addiction. And if you look at people who are addicted to anything, whether it's alcohol or meth or cocaine or heroin, they reach a point in their addiction where the addiction is all that matters to them. Their entire being is focused on feeding that addiction.
Yeah.
And anybody who's had to live with somebody who's a drug addict, or knows somebody who's a drug addict or an alcoholic, has seen that kind of behavior. I don't care what's going on around me. I need my next fix. And the same thing is true of the money junkies. And it's rather amazing to see the American Psychiatric Association with their diagnostic manual. They're declaring everything to be a mental illness. In fact, in the latest book, masculinity is now being declared as a mental illness. But they won't define money addiction as a mental illness.
Yeah, I hear you on that one. And apparently the Houthis are still remaining resistant, and they did an attack on a Saudi military parade in Yemen, killed top coalition officials. I don't think this war, going on 3 years, has been doing very well for the U.S. and Saudi.
No, actually, it's amazing. I mean, my hat's off to the people of Yemen who are withstanding the U.S. and Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. These are no small countries when it comes to weaponry. And I just hope, Mike, that there can be a negotiated settlement. Everything I read about this conflict says that unless that happens, all bets are off and the wars are going to continue.
The wars are going to continue. I'm afraid there are too many people who see continued wars as their best option, whether it's for enlargement of territory, resolving old grievances, making a lot of money. And that's really what nobody wants. Peace is bad for business.
Unfortunately, yes. And another subject on that particular theme, apparently the DoD has decided to halt its issuing of detailed strike releases, periodic reports. That gave at least some insight as to bombings targeting Islamic State fighters, buildings, and equipment in Iraq and Syria. Now, it's strange, though, in the midst of the withdrawal, the U.S. is stepping up its airstrikes in Syria.
Well, that's what we're being told here.
Yeah.
And supposedly there were 2 new bases that were being built as well, and equipment was being sent in. So again, it raises the question, who's really in charge of our war policy? Now, this idea of no longer releasing information to the public didn't come from the DoD itself. That actually came on down from Donald Trump himself, because the information being released to the public was not very positive for the United States, because it included counts of the civilian casualties, and showed that for all the money that is being poured into places like Syria and Afghanistan, we're not really making a lot of progress over there.
But apparently they had a note at the top of its 4 January strike release that they're going to be cutting these reports from biweekly transparency about the bombings and what is going on a little more slowly every couple of weeks. And so you have to wonder, as you said, about what is the real information coming out of Syria and who can we trust?
Well, there's the other aspect. I mean, if the information is coming out that rapidly, the other side can listen to it and adjust their tactics and logistics appropriately. That may be another reason for that step to have been taken.
And Russia did something rather recently. It has shifted 100 billion with a B of its reserves into yuan, yen, and euro in a great dollar dump.
That's $100 billion of its reserves.
Oh, man.
The de-dollarization continues here.
And the share of the U.S. currency has dramatically decreased in just 3 months between March and June of 2018, and from 43.7% to a new low of 21.9%, according to the central bank's latest quarterly report, which came out this time with a 6-month lag.
Right,
And
which means by now it's probably a lot
larger.
A lot larger. Basically, nations are moving away from the dollar because as long as they're using the dollar, they are subject to American whims. If they're going through SWIFT and going through the dollar, then U.S. sanctions can be enforced.
But not if they're not.
Yeah, if they're going with other arrangements, then the sanctions don't work. And the sanctions aren't working all that well.
No.
Russia's GDP is still growing despite all those sanctions.
Yep.
Iran, they're suffering some hardships, but they're not crushed down into abject poverty like the U.S. said that they were going to do. None of this stuff is really working out very well. And I think part of the problem is because you've got a lot of these policy people running around Washington, D.C., who just think this is going to be a really good idea. They don't think it all the way through. It's presented and basically sold as policy and then implemented.
Yeah.
Often, apparently, based on what happened in Syria, without President Trump's sign-off. Okay, we have a caller on the line.
All right.
Al in Canada. Aloha, Al. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Hi, Lady Claire.
Hello.
I've had problems with my back, and I'm telling you, it can be quite a bout of suffering.
Yes,
we know.
I wish you well.
Know. Thank you so much.
We learned that one the hard way this last year.
Anything else on your mind?
So my question is, Mike, earlier you were talking about Mike Pompeo and John Bolton basically countering something that Donald Trump wanted, the actual, elected president of the United States. And how many people do you keep a running count of how many people have been fired from his administration?
Well, I don't know that all that many have been fired, but quite a few have resigned and indicate that they are going to be resigning. But I haven't been keeping account. Maybe it's time to start there. But again, with regard to the situation in Syria, where Trump ordered a pullout, he is the commander-in-chief, and Pompeo and Bolton tried to derail it by throwing conditions on there. That is clearly insubordinate behavior. And I think Trump would be perfectly justified in firing both of them.
Yeah, I agree. I agree fully. Also, you have these government agencies, quote unquote, sorry, such as the Federal Reserve, the CDC,
yes.
Obviously the FBI and the CIA and all of it. And I mean, we're really talking about the deep state now.
Yes.
And that's, people think this conspiracy theory of this and that and the other. And no, politicians get elected. I mean, some of them are as dirty can be, and they get elected all the time.
Yes.
But
or the elections get stolen for them.
Yeah. So basically, like in a little nutshell, what I'm saying is there have been a lot of changes in Donald Trump's administration. It can't be because he's stupid. It can't be that, because the guy's a billionaire.
Well,
he's a debt king, right?
He had a leg up. I mean, he came from a wealthy family, and he's actually gone bankrupt a few times and had to be rescued. So I don't know how brilliant he is, and I got to tell you, I'm not impressed by him right now.
Well, you are a United States citizen. I mean, you keep track of this more than I do. I mean, you should try living in Canada, for crying out loud. Unicorns and fairy dust and all that nonsense.
Yes.
So, like for me, looking at Donald Trump and what he's doing and what he's trying to do, thinking what I'm thinking, I mean, he's faced he is at the wall, Mike. He is at the wall. You know,
Yeah.
he is at that wall. It's crazy, and yet he wants to build a wall. You know, when you think of the psychology behind that, it's actually quite amusing. Anyway, I'm glad you're up and about, Lady Claire. I appreciate your time, Mike. Thank you very much. Have
All
a
right.
good
Well,
one.
thank you very much here. And before we take our next call, we're getting a story just now coming on in. Apparently, Israeli jets have fired missiles from along the Lebanon-Syria border into the Damascus airport. Syrian air defenses apparently shot most of them down, and we're waiting for more details on that. All right, let's go to Peter in California. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Hi, Claire. Welcome back, Claire.
Thank you.
Hey, Mike, there had been a Command and General Staff College study back after the Israeli invasion of Lebanon and their war against Hezbollah in 2006 that has since been taken offline. But if I can summarize, because you were talking about the Israeli general saying there's a lot of deficiencies with their military, and also that Pompeo has declared basically that we're going to see the end of Hezbollah. Well, let me just summarize and say what they said. The findings of the U.S. Command and General Staff College study was that in 2006, the Israelis went into southern Lebanon with about 30,000 troops and several hundred tanks. They had a mechanized division and an armored brigade and another division. So it was more than two divisions. We would call that a corps.
Yes.
They had several hundred tanks. They had several hundred pieces of artillery. They had, of course, their entire Air Force. They had all the communications capability that a modern army can buy. And they had everything that we could supply them that they didn't have. And they went through, during this incursion, they went through all of their bomb dump. They went then through all of our bomb dump, and they fired several 100,000 rounds of artillery. And they, by the way, this 30,000 force was opposed by somewhere like 2,000 Hezbollah fighters. The difference being the Hezbollah fighters were willing to die like the Japanese were willing to die on Iwo Jima or Okinawa. They were dug in, they weren't moving, and the Israelis, frankly, didn't have the guts or the stomach to close with the enemy with all their advantages, because the Hezbollah had no artillery, they had no tanks, they had no aircraft, and their communications were rudimentary. And the Israelis managed, Claire and Mike, to make an advance of less than 5,000 meters.
Ooh.
Meters. We're talking like 3 miles. What is that, 3 miles?
Yeah, something like that.
Border. From their own border, 3,000 meters is all they could do with their joke of a military. And they all know that nobody wanted to die in Lebanon.
Yes.
Nobody wanted. They were going for the Litani River, and even with the helicopter support they had, they couldn't get behind them and take them as well. So that's the state of. No wonder they want us to take on Hezbollah for them. Hezbollah beat them in the 80s. They beat them in 2001 or 2000, and they handed them their butt in 2006. They've handed them their butt every single time. And,
well, you need to understand, Hezbollah are Lebanese. That's their country. And so they're basically standing on their own home soil fighting a foreign invader, and that's definitely going to motivate them. As far as the Israeli troops are concerned, as you said, they know they're going into somebody else's country. They're collecting a paycheck. They don't want to risk their lives. They don't want to get shot. And again, Israel's history has been to trick other nations into fighting their wars for them. The way they tricked Ronald Reagan into bombing Libya with the fake radio transmitter. That's how Israel operates, by way of deception. Thou shalt do war. And so now we have this ex-IDF chief who's gone public saying that despite all the advanced weaponry, Israel's ground forces are not really capable of a major ground conflict. And so that's why you've got Israel out there saying that you should go kill Iran for us, because it'll be the same situation. If Israel goes into Iran, Israel soldiers know they're walking into somebody else's country. They're there for a paycheck. They don't want to risk their lives. The Iranians are going to be standing on their home soil, fighting for their homes and their loved ones, things they can see with their eyes. They're going to be very well motivated. It's a problem that every invading army throughout history has had to face, that the defenders of the land being invaded are going to be fighting very, very fiercely because they're fighting for their own homes and their loved ones.
Well, but Mike, just one more thing. That is, they have zero ground capability. I mean, zero of going into Iran. They don't have. They don't even produce their own gas. Like, they couldn't even fuel the trucks to get past Jordan. But nevertheless, Hezbollah is not only a political party and a major political party in Lebanon, but they're more effective than the Lebanese army, and the people support them.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Anyway, listen, Peter, we got to let you go. We got to take a commercial break. We're going to be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program on this Pauhana Friday. And Claire, what do you have for us?
Well, I thought this was interesting. Dmitry Rogozin is head of Russia's space program. And he said that NASA has fallen victim to a domestic struggle in the U.S. and that the entire situation with sanctions list is an outrage. And you know something, Mike, he is totally, completely right.
Yep.
Especially sanctioning Russia for something it didn't do.
Yes.
You know, forcibly annexing Crimea. No. You continue to punish countries for stuff they didn't do, and ultimately that's going to result in a very bad effect. But he has something to say that I thought was striking and a little terrifying. And he made the statement, I think that America is actually engulfed by its second civil war now. And he said that in an interview with Rosia 24 TV and commenting on the reasons he got uninvited. You know, this seems to me to be pure spite.
Yeah, it does. It does. And of course, NASA's always been under tremendous political pressure. It's being politicized. We saw that certainly back on Viking.
Oh, yeah.
But apparently the U.S. and Russia were planning a joint mission to Venus.
Yeah.
Because Russia has had tremendous success soft landing on Venus. The United States has not. Conversely, Russia's had really bad luck with Mars. And of course, you know, Mars is sort of our turf. But apparently NASA is basically saying they're going to delay this planned visit by Rogozin. There's no new date for the visit being set. And again, I hate to see NASA become politicized about this. I mean, NASA was trying to talk to Russia about modifying one of their Soyuz capsules to be able to go to the moon. Because they're talking about an orbiting space station orbiting the moon and a permanent lunar base. The U.S. is talking about that. China's talking about that. And I remember one of the things that Kennedy did when he was in office was he wanted to get rid of the race to the moon and say, let's cooperate. Let's do this together. And that was certainly the spirit behind the International Space Station. But this idea of tit for tat and we're going to cancel the meeting, that could have repercussions.
Yeah.
I mean, the United States is still dependent on Russian-made rocket engines for like their Atlas missiles. And Russia could simply say, well, we're not going to sell those to you anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there have been some startups in the U.S. trying to build rocket engines, but they're having trouble coming up to speed.
Yeah.
Because it is a very tricky engineering problem, and a lot of our best engineers have already been lured away to other countries where people who know how to actually make things are treated with a modicum of respect.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a shame.
Okay, well, there's the music here, and it's time for us to get on out of here and have the weekend. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Please share what you learn here with everyone that you know. Snail mail, email, face-to-face. Bring back the art of the conversation here. Don't waste your time on social media. They're filtering everything now except the funny kitten videos. Please donate to RBN. They need it. Please donate to whatreallyhappened.com. We need it. Yep. Have yourself a pleasant and safe weekend. We'll be back on Monday. Aloha, America.